What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Tape. I am your host, TJ Wingert, lead draft and college football analyst for 32 Beat Writers. And today we are indeed talking about my updated 2026 quarterback rankings. We're now through the Senior Bowl. Got to see some of these guys up close and personal. I've watched the Shrine Bowl tape for the guys that applies to, plus just going back and refamiliarizing myself with guys who weren't at those set events. So excited to give you my top 10. I'll also give you, who would be quarterback 11, the next guy out. I will throw that in there as well. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this quarterback class. It's obviously not the group that we had hoped we'd be seeing coming into the season with guys like Dante Moore, Arch Manning, Lenoris Sellers, Brennan Sorsby, Josh Hoover, all these guys who kind of caught your eye either in the preseason or during the season, ultimately decided to go back to school. So 2027 class becomes very interesting, and that's not including guys who are first-year eligibles like Aiden Childs, CJ Carr, Julian Sane, things like that. So it's going to be a really interesting quarterback class next year. But nevertheless, let's go ahead and have some fun, jump into our top 10 quarterback rankings. But before we do that, I also do want to let you guys know it's a great time to go ahead and become a subscriber over at 32beatwriters.com. That's where you'll have access to all my position rankings. My top 50 is up there now. It's soon to be a top 100 big board live right now with my blurbs, my kind of quick shot analysis, all those guys that are in my top 100. Plus, Zarday Katsabadian, our lead fantasy analyst, all of his great work, Matt, Zach, everything they do on the beat reporter side, plus Charlie on the betting angles. This is an interesting time of year to go ahead and kind of get ahead of the betting markets too for next year's props and division winners and MVPs and things like that. So Charlie's very sharp there, and that content should be coming relatively soon. So definitely want to plug the website. Also, just some of the other episodes that are going to be coming out either later this week. Well, we'll have a mock draft again this week, 2-round mock. Then later, either Friday of this week or like Monday of next week, I will have a combine primer. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to do it. It would have been just me going, and just I think we're gonna hold off on the company expense that would be a trip to the combine for when there's more than just me going, and also the 2027 class looks bananas. So I think we're gonna kind of save up and go for that. But that being said, I do want to kind of go position group by position group, guys. I think at least one name that I think will do well, a name that I think you should keep under the radar, and then a guy that has a lot to prove from the combine. So we'll go position group by position group, give you a little bit of a primer of guys who I think can stand out, have a lot to gain from the combine, but also more position rankings on the horizon. And then I'm going to be reaching out to guests. So if you have anybody who's a draft analyst or even fantasy football analyst who has interesting takes in the NFL draft, drop some names down below. I'd love to be able to reach out to them and say, hey, our audience requested you, so come on the pod. Let's have some fun. Let's chop it up. So leave me those thoughts. Leave me those episode ideas, whatever you want to hear me talking about. I'm happy to provide it for you guys. But that's a little bit of what's on the horizon. Let's waste no more time, and let's jump into my top 10 quarterback rankings. And the man to lead us off is Carson Beck, the Georgia transfer to Miami, man who was playing in the national championship game. He comes in at quarterback 10. You can also see my grade evaluation there, where I would probably feel comfortable drafting these guys. The simplest way to put, what that means to me. So 6th round is probably where I'd take off. I could see a world where he gets nudged up to the 5th, 4th round because of value. We will talk about that. Just because, once we get to my quarterback 2, he has a certain round grade, but he will probably go a little before that, things like that. So, 6th round is kind of where I'm comfortable with Carson Beck. Could totally see where a team's pulling the trigger on that in the 5th, maybe the 4th. And to me, I've said this a lot on the channel. I've said this on other channels too. Mitch Kaiser, specifically the Point After podcast, went on his show. Definitely give him a follow and watch all the great work Mitch does. But I even kind of said it in his show. Beck's kind of like Jared Goff to me with a blown out elbow. So therefore, just like where Goff had an arm and accuracy and years of production that kind of led you to making him be the number 1 overall pick. Ever since that, halftime heave against, was it Texas? Where he had the crazy elbow injury, had to have surgery, ever since then, the arm just hasn't been the same for Carson Beck. So he's just kind of like Jared Goff, but with like backup traits instead of starter level traits. So that's just kind of where I'm at. I think he's a solid backup, runs the offense well enough, can stay on time. Some of the post-game comments, holding receivers accountable versus throwing guys under the bus. That'd be interesting where, if I had the chance to talk to him, I'd want to get to the bottom of that. And I've talked to some people where around the org who were a little rubbed the wrong way by it. And then other people who said, he's not saying anything wrong. He's spitting facts. So, that's what the quarterback's supposed to do. So I don't know. From the off-field kind of personality, I think he's a little bit of an acquired taste, but that's not really, it's hard for me to evaluate that because I don't have a locker room. I literally don't have a locker room that he's stepping into. So that will be kind of buyer beware, and it'll vary, team by team. But I think a guy who can play with solid accuracy, he's just not going to stretch the field. So if you're you're the Detroit Lions and you're looking for a cheap backup, like Jared Goff's cap hit's close to $70 million this year, which is banana land. Just go get this guy in as a cheap backup quarterback. And I know they took the swing of the bat at Hendon Hooker, and I think in a lot of ways that's a similar thing, but Hooker's just got a way stronger arm. But a guy who can play on time, play within the rhythm of the offense. And then for Beck, he's not going to stretch the field with how his arm plays nowadays. But in the event that you're the Detroit Lions, Goff rolls his ankle and he's out 3 weeks, whatever the case may be, could you go 2-1? Could you at least pull out a win there so your season's not tanked with Carson Beck? Yeah, I think with good enough weapons around him, that is something that is possible. But firmly a backup quarterback, and I don't even really think he's a backup that lives in the league all that long. Some of these guys you'll hear me talk about, like once we get to Luke Altmaier, that's a guy I could see being a backup for 8 to 10 years, and it wouldn't shock me whatsoever. Beck, I'm a little more hesitant to say that about, but I will give him something. Kid's a winner. And I know that's a little overblown, but the bigger the sample size, the more that stat can really indicate that quarterback being a driver of success. And again, it's not one size fits all, right? Like Stafford didn't have a great record when he was in Detroit, gets to LA, a better situation. He's an MVP winner and a Super Bowl champ, over the time that he's been in LA. So it's not always a direct driver, but it'll at least get you in the ballpark. And this kid's won a lot of college football games, 2 different programs. And, this year with Miami, at least say, hey, at least the run game was consistent. That last year at Georgia, receivers dropping a lot of passes and the O-line play was a little erratic and the run game was a little up and down. At least in Miami is like they could consistently win the ground game. They won up front in the trenches for the most part. And then you have Malachi Toney, who was kind of the headline guy. And then CJ Daniels, when he's healthy, is a really solid, reliable, kind of ex-boundary receiver. And then Malachi Toney's a freshman who breaks on the scene and becomes an impact player. And that's enough for Beck to work with and eventually go on a national championship run. So I think in the right environment, solid enough backup. I just kind of question, given where the tools are, how much more beyond his first contract he really stays in the league. And that takes us to our quarterback 9, then Sawyer Robertson. And trust me, there's a lot about playing the position. I think Beck's got the upper hand on Sawyer Robertson. So you could easily convince me to switch these two guys. But I'm going to go with Sawyer here just because I do think, 6'5", 221, the arm is a little bit more live. That being said, when it comes to like the footwork and the play-by-play consistency from an accuracy standpoint, Beck's got Sawyer Robertson there. But when it comes to stretching the field, I think Robertson's got a little bit more to work with. He's also a little bit better of an athlete. So this is just something where I'm thinking right now, Beck's the better quarterback. In 3 years' time, if these two guys were both drafted in the 6th round, who would I feel better about if I had to deal with them as a backup in 3 years or for a 3-game stint? In 3 years' time, I think there's enough tools there where I could see myself being more optimistic about Sawyer than I would be about Beck in that situation. If we're talking about it's next week, give me Beck over Sawyer. So a little bit of an upside and, ceiling versus floor ranking here. And if you're new to any of my rankings, you didn't follow my personal channel, you're new here to 32, well, welcome. Definitely subscribe, hit the like button, all that fun stuff. But I will typically do that in my rankings where there's 2 guys that I feel kind of similarly about when it comes to where I would draft them. But I'll kind of stack them in a way where it's like, here's your upside play. There might be a little bit of a higher ceiling with this guy. And here's the guy who presents a high floor. And I think I'm kind of doing that here, and I didn't really totally plan that out. But Beck is, I feel a little bit better about that. He's the higher floor guy. But Sawyer, in 3 years' time, I could see a world where he's got a little bit more to work with as a backup quarterback. Also, it does have good roots. He's the cousin of Jarrett Stidham, who's, rock solid backup quarterback. I know it wasn't great in the AFC Championship game, but that's a hell of a setting to make your first start of the season. His son was a former MLB player for the Montreal Expos, so he's got good athletic genes. But here's the biggest thing, man. Like, you look at the completion percentage, 60.2%. That is lower than the guy we're going to talk about next, who is not known as a high-level passer. And then specifically, the next guy we're going to talk about, his adjusted completion percentage is over 71%. That's about where you see most of these quarterbacks at. Carson Beck, for reference, adjusted completion percentage of 79%. Luke Altmaier, 75.1%. Sawyer Robertson, adjusted completion percentage is 67.2%. So that's taking out drops. That is solely measuring a quarterback's accuracy. So you can see where, from an accuracy standpoint, footwork, he is pretty scattershot. On top of that, 12 interceptions, just a mark that definitely has got to get better over the course of just playing more football. And that was kind of where I was a little disappointed in his tape this year, where he just didn't take that step forward. He just frankly didn't. And then furthermore, 25 big-time throws. That's a pretty good number. That's one of the higher marks we'll see between the quarterbacks we talk about. 4.6% big-time throw rate. These are all PFF stats. But easily, by far and away, the most turnover-worthy plays that we'll talk about in today's video with 21. Yeah, 3.6% turnover-worthy play percentage. That's just too high of a number. So you're talking about a guy who's got scattershot accuracy and still a questionable decision-maker. I just like the arm and the athleticism a little bit more than Carson Beck. So that's why he gets the nudge. But he's also got a lot further of a journey before he's, kind of a really confident backup quarterback. And that takes us to Taylor Green. He's my quarterback 8. And again, not known as a high-level proficient accuracy passer. And that's why when you see, Taylor Green has the leg up on Sawyer in not just completion percentage, because that could be kind of schemed up, but adjusted completion percentage, oof, that's not great. And Taylor Green's one of the guys we got to see at the Senior Bowl. So you see the updated 6'6", 229. That's pretty much what Arkansas had him listed at. He's one of these specimens where you don't have to lie about the height and weight because the dude's an alien. And you see that at the Senior Bowl. He goes out on the field and you're like, whoa. And especially if my memory holds, he was in the quarterback group with Luke Altmaier and Garrett Nussmeier, two guys who their stature is not why you're like pounding the table for them to go somewhere, third, fourth round. We'll come to those guys a little bit later on. But like comparing those two guys and their stature versus Taylor Green, I mean, it's night and day. And I feel like that's part of the reason why you put Taylor in that group. That being said, a guy with an absolute howitzer of an arm, and he's a really good quarterback. I mean, like a really good, mobile quarterback. He's absolutely dynamic on the run, on the move. Most of the time when he's breaking the pocket, he's looking to run. I don't think he's necessarily looking to extend plays, and that is a point of differentiation. Lamar and Jaden were two guys that were freaky athletes and obviously can make crazy plays happen. But even maybe less so with Lamar, but certainly with Jaden, when he broke pocket, he's looking for a big play. Like he's big play hunting. He's not really looking to tuck and run. And there's other mobile quarterbacks that it's one read and run. Taylor's a little bit more of that one read and run. But that being said, I think with his arm and with a little bit more time, he's just kind of the shot in the dark guy. I said the same thing about Malik Willis. And, for a couple of these teams, I'm going to name an ideal landing spot. But look, Malik Willis is not going to be in Green Bay this year. Like he's going to go get some starter level money, whether it's Arizona, Cleveland, Miami, maybe Pittsburgh. I have no idea. But he's going to be getting some sort of opportunity to start somewhere. He's going to get some decent cash flow coming his way. So this is a backup opportunity to be had in Green Bay. And considering Malik Willis, he was a one read and run guy at Liberty. Tennessee gave up on him and Green Bay got him for cheap. And next thing you know, Matt LaFleur works his magic, And that's what I think. That's why you keep Matt LaFleur as the head coach of the Green Bay Packers, right? Because he does stuff like that. But nevertheless, insert Taylor Green as the 5th round as the next Matt LaFleur project. Sign me up for that. But it would take one of those types of landing spots to get me really excited about Taylor Green. Because if he just goes to, and I mean, no disrespect to Mike McCarthy, we'll see what happens with the Steelers. But if he goes to Pittsburgh, where they've tried to do this a couple times, and it just the Mason Rudolph of it all, the Will Howard of it all, they're just throwing these day 3 guys, and then they don't really have an answer for developing it. And obviously, again, new head coach coming in, so things could be changing. But I'm using that as a certain example. So landing spots can be paramount. You can say that about a lot of these guys, no doubt about it. But there's tools within Taylor Green, but he's just scattershot accurate. The footwork's still a mess, and he's kind of like Cam Newton in this sense. One, that he's a freaky athlete, and he's got this big body. But when he misses, he's calibrated to miss high. And that's dangerous when throwing over the middle of the field. And that's where he gets himself into trouble specifically. When you're throwing to the sidelines and you're airmailing out of bounds, it's a missed opportunity, but it's like in basketball, it's not a loose ball. It's not a dead ball turnover, it is a dead ball turnover. Offense has to go side out. You give your defense a chance to reset versus live ball turnover. Okay, you pretty much gave up 2 points the other way. So that's the little bit of the thing with Taylor Green. He will throw over the middle of the field. He's not afraid from that. So again, I'm thinking dude, if I can get this guy to Green Bay day 3, sign me up for that. Or is it San Francisco? And this is, the reasonably priced version of Trey Lance for the 49ers and Kyle Shanahan or something like that. Or if Sean McVay thinks he sees something and he can, wire this guy to be a little bit more accurate, he can do it in the 5th round. That's all interesting. So I'm naming all these great landing spots for him, but Green Bay is the one where I specifically look at what Matt LaFleur did with Malik Willis, and Taylor's got more on his mask, but really dynamic athlete, has a huge arm, can let it rip. It just comes down to playing the position better, playing with better timing, being more accurate, sharpening up the mechanics. I think you can tighten up the release a little bit as well. Just these little things where it's just he's one of the 2 guys I'm going to talk about is I take him on day 3 just to see where I'm at by year 3 of that contract. I don't know if it's going to work out, but it could go the way of Kellen Mond, where he's out of the league by the time he's on his rookie contract, or it could go the way of Malik Willis, where it's okay, this guy's a really solid backup, can step in, and you know what? He's going to go get a bag in the offseason, and that's going to come into our comp pick formula. We draft him in the 5th round, and he got enough money to where Malik Willis is going to earn Green Bay the opportunity of the 3rd round pick, depending on what all they do the rest of the offseason. Also, Rasheed Walker will factor into that, yada, yada, yada. But Taylor's kind of interesting from my standpoint, but he's not the last guy we'll talk about in that bucket. But I got Taylor in the 5th round. He's kind of the first of those guys. You saw each of the first, Sawyer and Carson, I gave a 6th round grade. Taylor at least has enough tools where I'm intrigued by taking a shot on him, and I put him in the 5th round. And really, when you look at these grades, go ahead and account, a half grade bump because of the position value associated with this spot. That works against certain position groups, but for quarterbacks, you pretty much get a half grade bump. So If I'm saying 5th round, it wouldn't shock me if Taylor Green goes early to mid 4th round because there's just a needed position. So then that brings us to Luke Altmyer, a quarterback from Illinois. He is my quarterback 7. And this is another one of those kind of similar stacks where Taylor Green's a little bit of the upside. I'm intrigued where this could be in 3 to 4 years' time. And then there's Luke Altmyer, who, kind of the Senior Bowl kind of solidified this for me. He's WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. I wouldn't expect to see an insane amount of upside growth in Luke Altmyer's game. The arm is what it is. The athleticism is not great, but it's functional. But that's not going to change over the course of time. You're drafting Luke Altmyer because you see, this is San Francisco. This is like the landing spot for him. I know I mentioned that with Taylor Green a little bit, but like this is your CJ Beathard, your next Nick Mullins. Draft this guy on day 3, 5th round. If Mac Jones is gone, which it sounds like it's probably they're going to get an offer that they can't turn down. So if you get a 3rd round pick for Mac Jones from God only knows where, cool. And now you're looking for a guy who can be your new backup quarterback for cheap. I think Luke Altmyer, plug and play, West Coast offense, gets the ball out quick. Really decisive decision maker, accurate in the underneath, the intermediate parts of the field. And I think he's got enough of an arm to challenge deep down the field, but it's not his calling card. But for a San Francisco offense, that's not Purdy's calling card either. He's got enough arm to get it down there, but he's not Josh Allen. He's not one of these absolute aliens who's just got a howitzer throwing it all around the yard. Luke Altmyer kind of in that same vein, but also will attack the middle of the field, and he will do so relentlessly. Like this guy is not afraid to make some of those throws that you see sometimes quarterbacks get a little gun shy. This guy will let it rip. The real big negative for him is 6'2", 205. It's kind of capped out tools wise. The arm is what it is. It's fine. The athleticism is, adequate. And then his response to pressure, that was his bad games at Illinois or when he got sped up and when teams were just sending 5, 6, even 7 after him. They were just going to come after him no matter what. I found that to be more the case in 24-25 season than 25-26. So that's encouraging. So you get a little bit better this year at Illinois. And also in this circumstance where I don't think that offensive line took a step forward, and he did it without Pat Bryant, a top 100 pick. And overall, I think the weapons were a little bit weaker this year at Illinois than they were the year before. So in a lesser situation, I think there were some strides made in this game. And then you get to the Senior Bowl, and it's a lot of the same stuff, especially in the red zone. And that's where, to me, he most stood out was this guy can get the ball out of his hands quick, deliver it accurate, where the windows are really tight in the red zone, timing is paramount, and ball placement is paramount. And that's where it's that's where you draft this guy to be a solid backup quarterback. And this is the guy who I was alluding to earlier, where it's if he's a backup for 8 to 10 years, like Beathard, like Mullins, it wouldn't shock me whatsoever. So adequate across the board, but a smart football player can get the ball out into playmakers' hands. So this is firmly another backup guy, but he doesn't have the upside that, hey, let's see where Taylor Green goes. Maybe he'll fetch us a comp pick and he'll be a surprising backup option. He'll be the next Malik Willis. Maybe that's in the cards for Taylor Green. Not really in the cards for Luke Altmyer, but if you're drafting him and you got a cheap backup quarterback for 4 years, that's a win. And then if you re-sign him at a decent mark, you're going to get a guy with continuity in your offense. And again, San Francisco is the example I keep using. Purdy's only played 1 season completely healthy, where he hasn't missed a single game. That's super valuable to you, and that's part of why I'm not entirely sure they move on from Mac Jones. But from the people I've talked to, it sounds like they're going to get an offer that they can't refuse, and that offer would be somewhere in the 3rd round. 4th round, they're willing to keep him. 3rd round, they're willing to move him. So TBD, we'll see. But San Francisco, that West Coast, that Shanahan style of play, I think that's the type of place for a Luke Altmyer. All right, let's get on to my quarterback 6. That's going to be Drew Aller, and I know I don't love having Aller ahead of Altmyer, or even really Taylor Green for that matter. But, you go back to the jump that Aller made from 3 seasons ago to not this past season that finished up, but the year before that, where he goes on the college football playoff run. Obviously, it's a rough end in that Notre Dame game in the national semifinals. But that's a draft where, if he declares he goes number 2 overall, and I still think there's something in there. Now, granted, I don't know if he would have been worth the number 2 overall pick, and that was just the quarterback class that was. And that would have definitely been a part of the advantage to him declaring is just hey, there's a guy going 1 that everyone wants, and then there's not a whole lot of great options after that. Still TBD on Shuck and Dart. I like those guys for what they could do, and especially Shuck. But that being said, Aller would have been firmly QB2 just with that leap that he made. And then this year, it's kind of the leap in the wrong direction. Where even the first couple of years where they're playing some chump competition, it doesn't feel like Andy Koldanecki, their OC, really wants to have him air it out. And even when he does, the accuracy didn't feel like it took that step forward that we saw from 3 years ago to 2 years ago. You were kind of hoping to see another leap in that accuracy, and the footwork specifically still inconsistent. Ball placement is still a little erratic, but it's undeniable the arm strength and the ability to fit into tight windows. And when he attacks the middle of the field, when he had Tyler Warren, the guy would be fearless. And part of it's just having a weapon like that you can trust. And the receivers weren't great that year. They had Warren. This year, they definitely spent a lot of money in the portal. They went to try to revamp that, and it didn't fully come to fruition. Maybe he would have gotten there if he didn't get hurt, built up some more chemistry with this guy. Who's to say? But still, probably a fifth-round guy just because of the arm talent in and of itself. Coordinated athlete, not necessarily an explosive athlete, but I think with the arm talent and the leap in accuracy, that's at least more I can give him in regards to like where he is versus Taylor Green. Where like Taylor Green, I feel like the accuracy has always just been a bugaboo for him. It's been an issue. Aller, at least at one point, we saw a jump. And then, this last year, we didn't get to see another jump. At least we did see it. And then the arm talent's kind of undeniable. So, again, you could flip Taylor and Drew Aller. I don't hate that whatsoever. And then just comparing him to Luke Altmyer, there's just a lot more tools to work with where I think Altmyer can be a steady, consistent backup and rock solid. It's as much as I'm not necessarily buying it and banking on it, there is a little bit of a higher ceiling there for Drew Aller. If he gets in the right situation, there is a pathway where I could see him being a surprising starter at the next level. I just don't really see that with Altmyer. So, guy who's going to be a rock solid backup versus the mystery box. I feel like Peter Griffin in the Family Guy meme. There's a boat, but the mystery box could be anything. It could even be a boat. Like, at least there's a little bit of that possibility with Drew Aller. That being said, I know there's going to be plenty of people who are like, yeah, no, I didn't see it a couple years ago. All the hype going into this season. I'm out on Drew Aller, and I totally understand if that's where you're coming from. You've just been burnt one time too many. I'm just curious to see where the next, again, draft and stash, see where this guy is in 3 years with the right quarterback coach. Now, again, like this is probably, like I said, Pittsburgh earlier, if they don't go quarterback round one, this will be, they've already hired a Yinzer as their head coach. They're going to be like, the Penn State guy. Let's go see what McCarthy can do with him. And it's just going to be another shade of Will Howard in a lot of ways. But maybe I'm being too pessimistic about my Steelers, but I don't know. There's still a strong enough arm to where he's an intriguing draft and stash guy. Again, with the boom bust potential there, where like if he doesn't work out, like Altmyer is definitely the better backup option. But is there a possibility where Aller becomes, a starter who's probably not a high end starter, but could he be quarterback 30 through 35 with his arm? It's kind of hard to say. That's never going to happen, and it's absolutely ruled out, or at least it isn't any more or less likely than Luke Altmyer getting there, right? Because Luke Altmyer getting to quarterback 30 would certainly kind of surprise me. Aller, slim, but I could see the roadmap that gets you there. Anyways, let's get on to Cole Payton. He's kind of the last of these, actually the next two guys I both have like day 3 grades. So, but we're now leaving the 5th round comps and we're getting to our 4th round grades that I have that I've given out between Cole Payton here at QB5 and the two guys ahead of him. Payton's interesting, and I came to his tape late. He was someone who had a lot of buzz, a lot of hype throughout much of the regular season. And I just kind of like, I'll get to it when I get to it. Get the Senior Bowl invite, accepts. I'm going to the Senior Bowl. Okay, cool. So like 2 weeks before I go to the Senior Bowl, I'm watching Cole Payton. And I see what people are excited about. Like he is 6'2", 229 with a big arm, and he can move. He can absolutely move. Like he carries 229 extremely well, like surprisingly well. That being said, he does play in an offense where I don't think he had a single game with more than 25 pass attempts this year. It's also, they're clear and away one of the most dominant FCS schools. So like level of competition, not only is their like roster like better than everyone else, I just don't know about the level of competition in and of itself that he's playing against. And that's, I know there's other North Dakota State guys. I was a big Gray Zabel fan, and it's just, I don't know. The quarterback position is just a little bit different than the offensive line to me. And also like Zabel came and then kicked ass at the Senior Bowl, and that kind of checked that box. So it's not necessarily apples to apples there. But talking about the Senior Bowl, I did see some things that made me encouraged about Cole Payton. Specifically, the big knock I had on him mechanically while watching the tape was a bit of a Tim Tebow loopy windup. It just takes a little too long for him to be able to, because he's just dropping the ball too low before he's bringing it up behind his ear and he's ready and firing. At the Senior Bowl, it felt like that was a lot quicker. The ball's getting behind his head, behind his ear, and he's chucking and releasing a lot quicker. Still think it can be sped up a little bit, but that to me signaled, hey, he's already working with someone, it seems like. That would be a question I would love to ask him, but that's good to see. Like he's already kind of taking this onus on his own to clean up some of the things that he's probably getting feedback from coaches saying that he needs to clean up on. So he is kind of, and really you could have easily put him in the 5th round bucket where it's like, let me see where I am in a couple of years with Drew Aller. Let me see where I am in a couple of years with Taylor Green. But Cole Payton to me is like the number one guy of that, where it's like, let me see where I am by the back half of this rookie contract. Maybe there's something there because I feel the best about the combination of athleticism, arm strength, and accuracy. Aller didn't take that step forward when it comes to accuracy. I think Payton, he's got some drop it in a bucket type throws. Now, granted, in a smaller sample size in regards to like 1-year starter at North Dakota State, never had more than 25 pass attempts. And also he is such a dynamic weapon that he kind of opens up the field. Kind of the same stuff that like the Steelers wanted to do with Justin Fields. And it was the case with him at Ohio State, where he's such a dynamic runner that's one less guy in coverage because they've got to account for him as a runner, or it's one less guy that's rushing, or the fact that defensive ends are mush rushing instead of true pass rushing because you have to respect the pocket and the contain elements of the rush. So he makes the numbers kind of work in his favor in that regard. That being said, he is, I think, a more accurate guy than what I've seen from Drew Aller. He's got the arm strength of Taylor Green, but he's more accurate, and he's got the dynamic rushing ability, certainly. And then comparing him to Altmaier, it's like Altmaier, again, steady floor, I know what I'm getting, but like Cole Payton, with his athleticism and his arm, there's definitely a little bit of a higher ceiling. So he's basically just like the more appealing, more athletic version of like what maybe could be there with Drew Aller. But I certainly feel better about, again, using that. Could this guy eventually be QB 30 to 35? I see the roadmap for Cole Payton being a little bit wider than it is for Drew Aller, which is kind of crazy to say considering the school they're coming from. But you are talking about a guy with 1 year as a starting quarterback. But you go back 2 years ago, he was like a huge part of their red zone offense. He had 13 rushing touchdowns, which is kind of interesting. So you see the dual threat being played there. And sometimes that's an easy way to just like, hey, this backup quarterback's in for 4 games. Well, he can at least run. We can engineer something around that run game and that QB running element to get us to be a solid enough, stable enough offense for a 4-game stretch where we can go 2-2, maybe 3-1, depending on the schedule that we have ahead of us. So I do think the rushing ability at least gives them a decent enough floor. And then, again, the arm strength is certainly there. Now, again, you look at their offense and the level of competition. I think there's some throws that a lot of these guys on this list wish they could have had that wide of a window. So that's obviously I think that shrunk those margins for error, those windows shrunk at the Senior Bowl. What's encouraging is I thought each day got a little bit better. And day 3 is when we got into the red zone. And that was where I was like, okay, the timing and the accuracy, can he do it? And I thought he was pretty solid. And that's also an event where the Senior Bowl, like, he's not going to tuck and run. Like, the quarterbacks aren't allowed to run. So that major element that would make him a successful quarterback in the red zone was taken away from him. But all in all, I saw enough there where ball placement was solid enough and the timing got better each and every day. I think the first day was like, okay, wow, these guys are moving fast. Second day, I'm picking up on it. Third day, I'm comfortable. So it was good to see him kind of take those steps forward over each day at the Senior Bowl. You don't want to take too much stock into that, but between him cleaning up the release and then taking those gradual steps forward, both timing and accuracy-wise, that made me pretty encouraged about what we have here. I don't see a path to him starting anytime in the next 2 years. Again, 1-year starter at North Dakota State. Guy needs to play more football, or at least have more experience playing football, seeing the game, seeing the speed from the sideline, learning the playbook, yada, yada, yada. But again, I use this example, and again, I kind of fall back on the Steelers just because that's who my team is. But like, if they don't go quarterback round 1, they got Rodgers for a year. They would need something else for another year. But like, working with a quarterback whisperer and Mike McCarthy, where are we at in 3 years? Or if it's the Los Angeles Rams, Stafford's already said he's coming back, and maybe that's really the team I should be saying here is the Rams. You don't go Ty Simpson round 1 because you're trying to build pieces around your roster and win right now. But you see something in Cole Payton that, you know what, actually 4th round grade, but half round quarterback bump because of position value. We're going to take him late 3rd round, mid to late 3rd. And we know we got Stafford for next year, and we're pretty confident that he's going to come back for a 2nd year. Let's just run down this hypothetical. You get 2 more years of Stafford. And then you're turning it over to Cole Payton year 3. He's gotten to work with Sean McVay. He's sat behind Matt Stafford. Okay, put me in the interested bucket there. Which I know we could say that about a lot of guys. Oh, if they go to the Rams, let me see where we are by year 3. I know we could say that about a lot of guys, but I think that's especially true given the arm strength that Cole Payton brings to the table. So that is where I'm kind of coming from, and I'm interested. He is definitely the most intriguing draft and stash guy. I don't know if it's going to be anytime soon, or I don't even know if he hits the upside, but in 3 years' time, I think he's got the most interesting set of tools, and on top of that, good tape to go with it at a lower level of competition to where I'd be intrigued and I'd be willing to take a shot in the dark somewhere in the 4th round, personally, but I think he will probably end up going mid to late 3rd, but I think firmly 4th round for me, and I don't think he really gets out of the 4th round because he is an interesting dart throw at the position. All right, let's go to my top 4. The next 2 guys, really, there's nothing sexy about it. Cade Klubnik, like I said earlier about Carson Beck, he's kind of like Jared Goff, but with backup traits. Cade Klubnik to me is like Bo Nix, but with backup traits. The arm's a little bit less, the body frame not quite as filled out. So he's just like, honestly, if like the Denver Broncos lose Jarrett Stidham in free agency, this is a really cheap backup option. It gives you a very similar play style to me. But what I will say about Cade Klubnik, disappointing year for Clemson. the last 5 to 6 games of his season weren't that bad. They were actually pretty solid, and they kind of looked like the jump you wanted to see Cade Klubnik take. My take with him coming into the season was like the body type and the arm. I think he's kind of maxed out. Maybe he could be kind of a spunky, scrappy starter, like a better version of Taylor Heineke. But realistically, I think he's kind of like a backup version of Bo Nix. And I think that's kind of where – I think that's part of what we saw in the first half of the year, where like the tools are what they are and they're just not great. And then if you're not in a great environment where, Antonio Williams gets hurt week 1, it's like, uh-oh. They got some young receivers, but they're young, and they needed that headline guy to be the consistent chain mover, and that's Antonio Williams. And then, the run game wasn't great this year. The offensive line – it's fine. Blake Miller's pretty solid, but there's other pieces there that definitely left a little bit to be desired. So all those kind of pieces around him kind of deteriorating, I think, led to him taking a step back. But then eventually I think Clemson found its stride and he started playing pretty good down the stretch. Also, the level of competition, I think, kind of dropped off a little bit there too. So that certainly goes off to his advantage there. But the last 6 games, I was pretty encouraged, but it kind of solidified me like good enough athlete. Arm can play as a backup, and in a small kind of 4-game sample. It's always kind of what I lean to. Like, that's my confidence in backup quarterback. If I feel like I can't go 2-2 with a backup quarterback, I need to find a different guy for that role. That's kind of my line of thinking. And schedule is definitely a big determining factor in that. But, I do think this year he also cleaned up on the drifting. That was the other big thing I had as a negative for him this summer. Like, when he wants to extend time instead of like breaking pocket, he has a tendency to just drift and do like the Madden thing. And next thing you know, he's like 10, 15 yards behind the line of scrimmage. And it's like, you don't have the arm to overcome that, buddy. What are we going to do here? This year, I think he cut back on that a little bit, but it is still present in his tape, especially in the first half of the year. So I just think, he is what he is. He's 6'1", 206. He's kind of maxed out from a tool standpoint, but good decisive decision maker. I thought the Shrine tape was fine, like pretty solid accuracy. Ball comes out quick enough, but, in a setting where he's mostly throwing against air, they run in some 11-on-11s and he didn't really pop that much there. But he wasn't bad. Like he wasn't an eyesore either. Wasn't the worst quarterback I saw there. And frankly, there was another quarterback who I thought the tools looked even more maxed out than Cade Klubnik. So, he's fine. He's what you see, what you get. I think he's a backup version of Bo Nix. So if you're looking for a cheap version of that, and again, with his athleticism, I think he's spunky enough to where in a 4-game setting, you can go 2-2 with him as your quarterback. And then just ahead of him, I have Garrett Nussmeier, because I don't see Cade Klubnik having this possibility. But like with Nuss, specifically because he looked healthier and the ball just looked a little bit more live. And I thought clearing away, he was the best quarterback at the Senior Bowl. Not necessarily an event to make quarterbacks be a riser and move them up the board and change their draft complexion. Not really an event for that. Same thing with corners. Offensive line is kind of a tough thing. It's kind of catered against them with those one-on-ones. Nuss to me was the guy who you kind of saw what you wanted to see. The ability to throw with timing and anticipation, especially throwing to guys he's never thrown to before, was really impressive. Ball placement, for the most part, rock solid. And the arm looked better than it did this year at LSU. It looked a little bit closer to what we saw in 24-25, where threw for over 4,000 yards. And he still had a lot of those head-scratching interceptions, but he could fit the ball into tighter windows on those anticipatory throws because he had just enough arm. The next level, though, it's going to be interesting to see if he can cash the checks that his body's trying to get him to, because the arm strength in 24 was just good enough. Then he got banged up, the ab injury. All of a sudden, that arm doesn't play at the college level. The next level, not going to be a whole lot of games where you're playing at 100%. Maybe it's backup quarterback that changes, and he is definitely a backup quarterback to me, first and foremost. But I think there's a little bit of a Ryan Fitzpatrick possibility here with Nussmeier. There's a year or two where he's kind of like that spunky starter. Again, QB 30-32, or maybe take Andy Dalton, where it's like you don't love this guy being your quarterback, but God, a year ago we played this guy that absolutely shouldn't be starting the league. So Andy Dalton's feeling okay right now. Or Ryan Fitzpatrick, he's got enough of these 5-touchdown kind of gutsy performances where he makes throws that you're like, the quarterback had the gold to make that. That's insane. Some of that's there with Nuss, where I think he's just got that gall. He'll, meet on tape, if you know what I mean. He'll just put it out there. And Ryan Fitzpatrick was very much that guy. The flip side of that was Fitz was 6'3", 240. We're talking about a maxed out version of Nussmeier at 6'1", 202. I don't even think he has the arm of Fitzpatrick, to be completely frank with you, specifically from a drive throw standpoint. I think getting the ball down the field, Fitzpatrick had some balls that would hang up and flutter in the air, and Mike Evans kind of bailed him out. And there's some of that with Nussmeier. But there was also some throws where it's like 3rd and 12, backside dig, got to fit it in there, and Fitzpatrick could step up, climb the pocket, and rip it. Nuss, I don't know, has quite that same level of drive arm talent. So even as I say, there's a little bit of a Ryan Fitzpatrick possibility. The tools aren't quite the same there, even for Nuss. But I do think there's a world where that is a little bit more evident than I think it could be with Cade Klubnik. So I'm going to give Nuss the slight edge. But again, 4th round grade. And another one of these guys where kind of like Cole Payton, I could see mid to late third. Rams are another interesting possibility just from the timing and anticipatory windows. A team that swings and misses on a quarterback in round 1. Maybe they do it late round 2. Like, never forget, Kyle Trask was the 64th overall pick by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And if Kyle Trask can go top 64, I don't want to rule that out for Nuss. Hell, in my last mock, I have him go to the Rams at 61 just because we hit O-line and corner. We've hit their major needs. What could be interesting here at 61? Well, what about Garrett Nussmeier as a draft and stash guy? Again, that's probably a little early for me personally. I would do it in the 4th round, to be completely honest with you. Maybe late 3rd. But I do think, late 3rd is mid to late 3rd is probably when he comes off the board, maybe even a little earlier. And again, the Pittsburgh Steelers, I'm just kind of like waiting for what they're going to do. But if they don't get Ty Simpson round 1, I could see a world where they're like, there's enough similarities there with Garrett Nussmeier. We'll take a 3rd round swing of the bat on that. And they also did draft Will Howard last year. So again, I could kind of see Howard's got a much bigger frame though and a much better runner though. So I, not necessarily 1-to-1 either. But anyways, Nussmeier, I think solid backup, does a lot of things well, plays like the guy who's a son of a former quarterback and quarterback coach and offensive coordinator. His dad's Doug Nussmeier, if you don't know, the OC for the New Orleans Saints. He plays like that. But he is kind of maxed out at 6'1", 202. And the arm looked better at the Senior Bowl, but I still don't think it's one that's like going to let him get away with all the throws. And again, that's kind of where I go back to Fitzpatrick. There were plenty of throws that Fitz made where it's like, what are we doing, bub? And I think some of that's going to be evident with Nuss the next level. But again, from like a cerebral running an offense, he is kind of the best of the backups. And like, I think back to that week 1 game against Clemson, he threw for like 248 yards, nothing crazy. He might not even throw for that, but he ran the game. Like, when it comes from a game managing standpoint, that was like top shelf, like what you could see a college quarterback do. And against a vaunted Clemson defense, week 1 of the season, both teams are amped, pumped up, but you don't have any new tape on either one of these guys, or either one of these teams. So that was a really interesting showcase. And I think that's kind of the game. And I know it's the first game he played this year, but it's like the best showcase of like what this guy could do for you. And again, a 4-game setting as a backup quarterback. Keep the offense on schedule, keep everyone even keel, high success rate. Let's just keep the ball moving forward. We won't generate big plays. I'm going to make enough throws with timing, anticipation, and leave meat on tape just enough that if the offense is running on schedule, we can go 2-2, maybe 3-1 in that 4-game stretch. But that takes us into quarterback 2. That is going to be Ty Simpson for me. He's been kind of my quarterback 2 there for a while. Once we knew Dante Moore wasn't going to come out, or even once we had the caveat of like, if Dante Moore doesn't come out, this is going to be what I think. That being said, I am interested in what Ty could be in a better situation. You look at what he had at Bama. I've never seen a team struggle so much, a Bama team that is, to run and establish the ground game. Like, that has always, and I've been alive for now 28 years, that has always been a Bama fixture, like run the ball and play defense. And there's varying years of where they're like insanely excellent at it. Mark Ingram, Derrick Henry with some of the best defenses you've ever seen in the mid-2010s, early to mid-2010s. And then, to lesser extents, but still one of the better teams in the country at running the ball and playing defense. This year wasn't the case. Offensive line play was up and down, definitely better when Jaden Roberts was in there from a run game standpoint, but he's like the master of playing 17 reps a week. And then the backs, like I think Jam Miller's okay, but like the backs weren't great either. But I think a combination of both the backs and the O-line are why that run game went kind of nowhere. And then their best receiver took a pretty big step back this year, specifically in his drops problem. And Ryan Williams, at one point this year, he had close to a 30% drop rate, probably about midway through the year. I'm like, dude, that just cannot fly. And then Jeremy Bernard kind of stepped up as their best receiver this year. He definitely was their best receiver this year. But he's kind of this ultimate complementary style of receiver, not a number 1 alpha, Cam Coleman, Jeremiah Smith, I'm a dog, this is my offense type of number 1. So I feel like he had a lot of pressure put on his shoulders. And I think you saw that by the time we got to Halloween. And that to me was like, you get to the Halloween point of the calendar, and after that, his play kind of drops off, and everyone's noting, the accuracy, the ball placement, it's all a little bit more spotty. He's taking more sacks, being more careless with the football. All that I think was true. But I think it's because they were going on a playoff run, and the guy who was going to get them there was Ty Simpson, first and foremost. It wasn't the run game. Their defense was solid, but it wasn't Bama level defense. It was going to be Ty Simpson doing what he did at the beginning of the year. He beat 4 top 25 teams. Like, he was the formula to those 4 wins. And if they were going to do it down the stretch, it was going to be that. And I think you saw also kind of where another one of the negatives, and where I have him as a 2nd round guy, but give him again the half round quarterback bump. He'll go mid to late first, I think. His frame is a little bit concerning. It's better than Nussmeier, but 6'2", 210. He could probably add a little bit to it, but he also got hurt 3 different times this year. I've been told 3 different injuries. I think that's part of why he looked better in the Oklahoma game. He just got 2 weeks to finally heal up and get kind of what we talked about with Nuss in the Senior Bowl, where it's like he got healthy and the ball looked better. But then as soon as you get through the Oklahoma game, you kind of re-dinged up, not necessarily to the same severity, but you play the game. you're not at 100% now. And now you're going to play an Indiana team who doesn't make mistakes. And you're trying to carry an offense that doesn't normally have the same firepower and oomph to it that it normally does. So that was just going to be a recipe for disaster. And that's part of why I took Indiana spread in that game. And it was an easy win from a betting standpoint. But that being said, the next level, right? Like the Rams at 29, like where you have heard these landing spots be for Ty Simpson. I don't love Jets at 16, but I can even see a world where Pittsburgh at 21. I do think Pittsburgh at 21 is going to be the place where he goes. They just drafted, they're hosting the draft this year. Mike McCarthy, I could totally see a world where McCarthy looks at Ty Simpson and is like, yeah, like not an elite arm, but a really good accurate passer, wins with timing. And this is kind of my version of Dak. I'm going to get to have my version of Dak in Pittsburgh. And I know that's high praise. I'm not trying to say that Ty Simpson is for sure Dak Prescott. Cowboys fans, don't come for me yet. But I could see a world where Mike squints and gets to that conclusion. And again, they're hosting the draft. Like Ty Simpson's a Steeler. I'm pretty confident that's going to happen. We'll see if I'm wrong. But, the Steelers with DK Metcalf, add another receiver in free agency, Brandon Ayuk maybe, or Juwan Jennings, and then maybe draft a guy, or maybe, Mike McCarthy figures out the Roman Wilson thing. All of a sudden, you can kind of see this spot where it's like, okay, it's not just one guy who's your receiver who really should be playing competent to someone else. There's enough receiving talent there. And, the offensive line's made some good headway. We'll see what happens with Dylan Cook, or the Rams, of course, are the easiest one where it's like, okay, two clear-cut number one receivers, assuming they go offensive line at 13. Okay, cool. We're feeling good about the O-line. Two really good backs that fit it, and a great offensive mind at head coach. You can see a world where, and that being said, if you put them in an ideal situation, let's just say the Rams, I think it's kind of like getting another Jared Goff, which would be the ultimate irony here. The Rams, the team that traded Jared Goff to go get Matt Stafford because they didn't feel like he could win them a Super Bowl, and eventually Stafford gets you there. You're not taking him at 1 like you did with Goff, but like if Ty Simpson follows you at 29 and he's your drafting stash, it kind of feels like you drafted another Jared Goff for a little bit. Put on a rookie contract, allows you to build out the rest of the roster. Could you win with that? Yes. And frankly, consider we only have a year, maybe 2 more of Stafford, just to have the next guy in the building, learning, kind of seeing Stafford's process, working with McVay for a year or two, like that in and of itself brings a lot of value. But like, it's just kind of that would be the most ironic thing in the world to like move on from Goff to get Stafford and then draft another version of it. But that's kind of what I see with Ty Simpson. And like specifically, again, I go back to my Steelers just because you look at where the quarterbacks played, it has been like, I'm sorry, Russ and Justin Fields together, they were not a top 20 quarterback. Rodgers last year was close, but he was not a top 20 quarterback. He's probably QB 20 to 24 last year. Big Ben down the end of the stretch, post elbow injury, he was not a top 20 quarterback. So if you're telling me, Ty Simpson can be a Jared Goff-esque player and just literally get to QB 16. It's been a long time since the quarterback in Pittsburgh has played anywhere near that level. It has been since before the pandemic, before Big Ben's elbow injury. That's how long, since 2019, since they've had league average quarterback play. So that's where you can kind of sell yourself on the spot where you don't love him as a first round pick, but like the Derek Carr thing when he was in the league and now he's maybe coming out of retirement. There's always a team that's hungry enough for average quarterback play because they've just been starved with suboptimal quarterback play for so long. So I do think Ty Simpson goes mid to late round 1. The Steelers at 21, the Rams at 29, all makes sense. A team could trade it back in the first round, like the Arizona Cardinals. I'm looking at you. Could they trade back into the first round from that, third pick in the third round, second pick in the third round? I think that's a possibility. Could they do the Jackson Dart thing? I think that's a possibility. So, that being said, again, I don't think this guy's going to be a top 12 quarterback in the next level. And that's why I have a second round grade. I think there is some limitations to what you would ask him to do and ultimately what he can do with his arm. But he's a good athlete, wins with accuracy. And when he's not trying to carry an offense, I think that's a recipe that he can thrive in. Now he's going to need a better environment. And now what's tough about that is we're trying to project a better environment at the next level where the speed of the game, the decision-making, the room for error is all much higher than at the college level. So I'm trying to anticipate a better situation, but it's also a harder task. So that's where it gets a little tough here for Ty Simpson. But late first round, I think is ultimately where Ty does come off the board. And then that takes us to number 1. And, frankly, I can be real quick here. Like everything I'm going to say about Fernando Mendoza, you've heard before. And really, I want to give a ton of props to Corey Kinnan. And I remember Nate Tice was really high on Fernando Mendoza coming into the season. And part of the reason he was my summer quarterback 7, I'll go to this exact note. Fernando Mendoza a year ago, big time throws, 12. That's 2.9% big time throw rate. Turnover worthy plays, 17. So more turnover-worthy plays last year at Cal and a higher turnover-worthy play rate than he did big-time throws and big-time throw rate. It was 3.5% turnover-worthy play rate. Then he gets to Indiana, gets to work with Curt Cignetti, who really is, like, he's got to give him credit. Him and his staff, like, they're developing quarterbacks at a really nice rate. Like, what they did with Curtis Rourke was really a nice story, really. Especially post-injury, I was kind of hesitant to see if Rourke could get back to some of the fun moments he had. And I was doing it at Ohio University, not the Big Ten in Indiana. But that being said, taking 12 big time throws at Cal, that number jumps up to 23 this year in Indiana, 5.7% big time throw rate. 17 turnover worthy plays at Cal, 3.5% turnover play rate, to just 12 this year at Indiana, 2.6%. So you saw the necessary jump I needed to see personally. Decision making. He was always an accurate guy, and he had the arm to make the throws outside the numbers. Like, he has a B+ NFL arm. That wasn't a question, and enough mobility to create and kind of you get out of a muddy pocket, pick up 5 yards. All that was always evident for me, which is the decision making I need to see cleaned up. And like, what a perfect landing spot. One, between the offense they run, the RPOs, it kind of insulates the decision making you have to make. But also, I think the coaching is a big part of it. Like, they got him to take that next step forward. So, ton of credit to player, ton of credit to situation, ton of credit to the coaches. This just all came together to be the perfect formula for Fernando Mendoza to go number 1 overall, but before that, win the Heisman and win a national championship. The Joe Burrow three-peat, like that is exactly what you want to end your college career. But Mendoza, man, he's kind of boring from this standpoint of watching his tape. You almost just want to watch the first half of the play, because as soon as the ball comes out of his hand, you almost don't, and again, you watch it, but you almost don't need to watch the second half of the play, because not only is the ball going to the right guy, it's shoulder, number, shoulder. You'll kind of hear that, or outside of the frame. That being said, when it comes to where the ball needs to be, not just like who the guy is getting the ball, like if it needs to be on his left shoulder, it's on his left shoulder. If it's on his right shoulder, it's on his right shoulder. Numbers. That's what really stands out to me with Fernando Mendoza. And it's boring to watch sometimes, just because you can get through the first half of the play and you're like, all right, it's going to be on that, left shoulder, Elijah Surratt on the left sideline. It's going to be perfectly placed, right shoulder on that left sideline for back shoulder to Elijah Surratt. It's almost boring. But he's so surgical, and he's also mad competitive. The other big thing that stands out for Fernando Mendoza is like every time he had adversity thrown in his face this year, right? The pick against Iowa, the pick 6 against Oregon, he bounces back immediately. And even on that play in that Iowa comeback, he gets clobbered after he threw that pick. But as he's getting clobbered, delivers a dime up the seam. The Penn State game, for that comeback drive, the first or second play was almost a disaster. Almost lost the game right there. Next play gets walloped in the face, delivers a seam ball, 23-yard pickup or something like that. Like, this guy, he's fearless. He'll take shots in the pocket. He'll stand there, deliver a dime. But every time he faces adversity, he always bounces back as well. So just love so much of what Fernando Mendoza. And I would probably put him a little bit ahead of Cam Ward, just like quarterback rankings. But Cam Ward wasn't a blue chipper for me last year. Neither is Mendoza. He's the number 1 guy on my board, but that is position value that puts him up ahead of the other guys who I have as a blue chipper. That being said, he's the number 1 guy on my board, and I would draft him at number 1 overall if I'm the Raiders, ahead of the guys who I have blue chip status for. Same thing I said about Cam Ward. So, like, still mad respect to what that is, and position value getting there to be number 1 guy on my board this year in Mendoza. Ward was not number 1 on my board last year, but that was just because I like the blue chippers that much that I would maybe think about it, but it would depend on position and team need and whatnot. But yeah, Mendoza, really fun player, crazy accurate, B+ level NFL arm, maybe even A- to be honest with you. The big thing is going to be, like, he's going to go to the Raiders. He's going to need to play more under center. So that's a little bit of projection, not a whole lot of that in Indiana. And then, like, Indiana ran an RPO-heavy offense. So I think Clint Kubiak's a really smart play caller, and he'll put him in a good situation to where he's not leaving his quarterback out to dry. Like, same thing that he kind of did to make the situation more bearable for Sam Darnold. Also, credit to Sam Darnold for taking strides in his career in the right direction. But I could see where Clint Kubiak is keeping Mendoza insulated from a decision-making standpoint. But I could see with the first year or two, we're kind of still working out some of those kinks. But by year 3, this guy is going to be a really sharp decision-maker. The question is just, like, how high is the ceiling? And that's where I think you're getting some of the Todd McShay discourse, like, well, should you take him at 1? What if you get a crazy offer? And I think all that is fair. You should explore every team-building possibility. And if you're not, you're leaving a stone unturned. And I don't think that's fair and the best process possible. That being said, you take him number 1 overall this year because the Raiders have been in QB purgatory for so long. You go take this guy, no doubt about it. The question is he going to get it beyond, like, QB 12 status, QB 10 status maybe? Can he be above that Matt Ryan inflection point? And throughout this entire process, Matt Ryan's been the comp for me. A little bit of Kirk Cousins in there as well. The ability to just take a shot and just deliver a ball regardless. A little bit of Kirk Cousins in there. And, like, the competitiveness, fieriness, there's definitely Matt Ryan, Kirk Cousins in his DNA. But Matt Ryan, number 1 overall pick, so, like, it's not uncommon for someone like Mendoza to go number 1, even if he isn't Caleb Williams, Trevor Lawrence, that type of uber crazy number 1 toolsy. We knew 3 years ago this guy was going to be number 1 overall pick, but worthy to be the number 1 pick. He is the best quarterback in this class, does so many little things right. It's just going to be, is he QB 10 to 14, Or can he beat that estimation and actually rise to the level where he's a top 5, top 6 quarterback at the next level? Because that is going to do it for my updated quarterback rankings. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below, which, by the way, the guy who was just outside this, Jalen Daniels, QB11, liked enough of what I saw at Shrine. The arm is live, man, and he's an interesting athlete. So another one of those draft and stash guys I'd probably take in the 6th round just to see where we are in 3 to 4 years' time. So, by the way, I forgot to mention that off the top. He was quarterback 11, the name that just missed the list. But let me hear your quarterback rankings down below in the comment section. Who are you most intrigued with? Where would you take these guys? How many quarterbacks go round 1? Whatever you want to talk about down below in the comment section, I'd love to hear those thoughts as we break down this 2026 quarterback class. Next position ranking will be running backs, so you can go ahead and leave me your thoughts on the running back class, some names to watch, and maybe if there's someone I haven't heard of, that would be interesting. But shout them out down below, and I'll give them a watch, and we'll see if they make the list next time out. But also, mock draft on the horizon, combine preview, lots more on the way here at 32 Beat Writers. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Teach. We are signing off.